about how I remembered Harlem, but how other people remembered Harlem, and to hear what Harlem meant to them. So I decided to go back far as possible to find out what really made Harlem Harlem.
This community is an American legend. Harlem stretches north above New York's Central Park for more than 50 blocks, along avenues called Fifth, Lenox, St. Nicholas, Convent, Adam Clayton Powell Boulevard. Jews have lived here and Germans, the Irish, the Italians, and the Scandinavians. Today, Harlem is the most widely known black neighborhood in the world. It is an old city within the city, a place where fable still mixes easily with hard fact, where trouble blends into hope and joy into style. Harlem can be compared to a huge orchestra, its players gifted with a grand ability to improvise under pressure. If New York City is the Big Apple, this part of town, Harlem, provides much of its flavor. This is Harlem, remembered. Before pilgrims came to the New World, the people of the Lenape Nation settled uptown, as Harlem is often called. Under the leadership of their great chief, Rechuac, the Lenape built homes along an upper shore of Manhattan and established a thriving fishing village at what is now 119th Street and the East River. Dutch settlers asked them to leave the area, saying the island of Manhattan had been sold. Not by us, Chief Rechuac insisted. He told the Dutch they'd have to pay for any land the Lenape had developed. So the Dutch paid. Lenape Nation moved to the Bronx. Uptown was now called New Harlem, after a city in Holland.
My family came to Harlem in 1664. I'm Dr. Walter and I live in Nyack. But my great-great-great-great-grandfather was resolved at Waldron, one of the original patentees that developed the village of New Harlem around 125th Street and the East River by the buffer zone in case of Indian attack, so it wouldn't hit New Amsterdam first. When the English took over New Amsterdam without the Dutch giving any resistance and called New Amsterdam New York, they tried to change the name of New Harlem to Lancaster. The Dutch, being very stubborn and very Dutch, decided they couldn't do that to them, and they would never, in any of their deeds or any of their requests or anything like that, use the name Lancaster.
New Harlem prospered. The Dutch brought in slaves to build homes, and the slaves carved out a long road toward Lower Manhattan. The road was eventually called Broadway. Harlem remained a peaceful country town for more than 100 years after its founding in 1637. But Uptown's quiet rolling hills were disturbed when America's War of Independence caused General George Washington to write in a dispatch to Congress, "We are encamped on the heights of Harlem, where I hope our troops behave with tolerable bravery and show themselves to be worthy of the blessings of freedom, though experience has shown me that this is generally too much to ask of them." But the British were driven out anyway. Harlem's small farms now gave way to a community of large estates. The Jumel Mansion was one. Hamilton Grange was another. Both are still standing in Harlem today. By the beginning of the 1800s, a new class of downtown merchants and businessmen had moved uptown to live. Many of them traveled between their homes and offices by boat on the Harlem and East Rivers. Uptown was now a wealthy suburb of New York City. But during the 1880s, changes came again to Harlem, as the estates were gradually surrounded by a new urban environment that eased steadily uptown. Just before the turn of the century, Upper Fifth Avenue looked like this. And Upper Park Avenue like this.
I remember Harlem in 1882. Father was a lawyer and took the L to get his office at 31 Liberty Street. And I was born at this Harlem address, 231 East West 132nd Street. I was born October 1st, 1882. When we left Harlem, I was only 5.5 years old. And the tricks that I used to see my older brothers and the youngsters in the neighborhood do, one was to tie a light cord from the lamppost to the house. And policemen wore the high hats at the time, and as the police would walk over, he could knock his helmet off, which disturbed him very much. But I saw that trick played several times. 132nd Street was the last row of houses, and my family moved out of Harlem because they started to build a row of houses on 133rd Street. And Father decided that was getting pretty overcrowded for his family of 4 boys. As I recall, for the 5.5 years that I lived in Harlem, I didn't see a colored boy.
Not many colored boys lived in Harlem at this time. Until the turn of the century, Black New York was located further south on Manhattan's west side, in districts like San Juan Hill, where New York City's Lincoln Center complex now stands. And the Hell's Kitchen district, site of today's Port Authority terminal. This part of San Juan Hill is at 59th Street, looking east toward Columbus Circle, around 1900.
I remember well living in Hell's Kitchen, although I went there as a youngster, but I was easily 14 years old before I moved up to Harlem. But Hell's Kitchen was a section which stretched from about 37th Street up to 51st or 52nd Street, and from 8th Avenue west over to 11th and 12th Avenue. The street we lived in was 41st Street, and between 9th and 10th Avenue. This section of Hell's Kitchen got its name because every Saturday night it seemed like all hell would break loose between the families of different ethnic origin for one reason or another. They seemed like they could get along pretty near every other day until Saturday night, when for one reason or other the police would have to run the paddy wagon up and down the street all hours of the day and night. If you wanted to walk down 8th Avenue or 9th Avenue, past 40th, 39th, and 38th Street, you had to watch out for a fight on your hands. Same way, when you get to 37th Street, the white man had a fight on his hands. The biggest race riot started right on 8th Avenue and 41st Street, which is just a block away from where our part of Hell's Kitchen was. And that all started because a detective suspected a woman was standing on the corner soliciting. But instead, she was standing there waiting for her husband to get off the trolley car to coming home from work. And he got off the car just in time to see this detective grab her. And that started the fight. The fight ended up in a riot. And the riot lasted for 3 days, the biggest in New York. In the back of each floor in the house was an iron fire escape. In the summer, we children often slept out there, much more comfortable than in the hot room of the flat. The railroad apartment was gas lighted. In the rear of the house were the outdoor toilets with gas lights in the halls, cold running water, a kitchen stove, and a large front room stove kept us comfortable in the winter. The housing situation was bad so far as being able to expand. There were only 2 houses for colored people in our street. In the east, between 8th and 9th Avenue, there was a number of houses for colored, but there were no other colored houses. In 40th Street, there was none. In 39th Street, there was 1 or 2, and 37th Street was all colored. And the troubles that we used to have with the race riots was at those streets, 37th and 41st Street. And then they would jump to San Juan Hills section in 62nd Street. But we didn't have to go far to find trouble anywhere whatever you wanted to do.
In Harlem, there was fine housing and space to build more. Life was comfortable here for the community's wealthy families who lived in Harlem's many mansions, along its many spacious boulevards. 125th Street now anchored a blossoming Harlem business world as a commercial mainstem. The famed impresario Oscar Hammerstein lived uptown and urged his Harlem neighbors to spend their money there. Hammerstein put his own money where his mouth was and built the Harlem Opera House on 125th Street, next to a burlesque theater called Hurricane Seaman, which later became famous under a new name, the Apollo. A monthly magazine published by the Harlem Chamber of Commerce wrote of this era, "In the near future, the center of fashion, culture, and intelligence will be found in the ancient and honorable village of Harlem." The natural beauty of the region cannot help but attract people of taste and wealth.
Morningside Park. And Morningside Park had a beautiful hill. It ran from about 117th or 118th Street down to 110th Street. And we used to come scooting down there on our sleds. It was marvelous. None of us knew that we were poor. We were all the same. Sometimes parents had money, sometimes they did. Sometimes we'd have meat, sometimes we didn't. I was the first one in my family born in this country. My two older sisters and my older brother were born in England. My father had a little tailoring establishment. He used to make clothes for ladies. Our street between 7th Avenue and 8th Avenue on 115th Street was made up of mostly Irish kids, a few Jewish boys like myself, some Germans. No Italians at the time lived there. And I seem to remember when I was about 7 years old that in the apartment house just west of the library on 115th Street, on the north side of the street, second house in from the corner, there was a colored family living there. I don't seem to recall any other black people in the neighborhood. In PS 10, when I was in elementary school, we had, maybe 2 or 3 colored children. And when I went to high school, there were only 2 or 3 at Deeper Clinton at the time. We used to walk up 7th Avenue to 125th Street to the hotel. Then we'd walk down 125th Street either to 8th Avenue to the Burlesque Theater, or we'd walk down to Lenox Avenue, and then we'd walk down Lenox Avenue to 116th Street. We used to go to the Regent Theater on 116th Street and 7th Avenue and watch the vaudeville act on Saturday afternoons. And the Regan Theater, I think there was a R-E-G-U-N theater, where it was just movies, and the Loews 116th Street. Oh my goodness, there were so many things to do.
Way back in 1911, there was a Finnish social club on 125th Street and Madison Avenue, which held about 500 people to sing and dance and act in plays. And as the membership grew, they finally, in 1917, were able to purchase a very beautiful building on the corner of 127th Street and 5th Avenue. And we used to have plays and athletic events. My father was a sailor, actually, when he left the old country at the age of 16. And every time he was inshore, he would, like everybody else, go to the Finn Hall. And my mother was a very pretty young gal, tiny, and she would also go to the Finn Hall on Maid's Night Out, which was every Thursday night. Then I think that there is a park, a small park. Is it Mount Morris Park, right off 5th Avenue, around 120th Street? According to the way Mom used to call it, and Dad, they used to call it Pusuparki. And Pusuparki means kissing park. And I guess on Sunday afternoons, after they saw a play there or something, they'd all stroll there and hold hands and do all the things that come naturally to young people. The 5th Avenue Hall had billiard rooms and a restaurant and a beautiful, beautiful dance floor that really Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers could have used. It was just gorgeous. And this is where many romance started, including my mother and father, and that's where I picked you up, didn't I?
That's fine.
It was around 1909, as I figured, that there was so much advertising going on and invitations extended by the real estate people in Harlem that we got interested in moving up to Harlem. There was the houses were opening up with such advantages to people that we did not have downtown. That is, there were no more railroad apartments. There were some houses even had elevators you could ride up and down on. You had that service too of dumbwaiter service, where you could have your groceries pulled up to 4 or 5 flights. But the indoor toilets, the hot and cold water, the steam heat, was all an invitation to come and move to Harlem. Naturally, to be with a larger group of our own people was a natural invitation, and that Harlem was growing by leaps and bounds. Nail and Parker, Hutchinson, they were leasing these houses and opening them for colored people, such that it was hard to turn down the opportunity to go. So we went and moved up to 135th Street, and 134th and 135th were the first 2 streets opened up for colored people.
A small group of fairly well-to-do blacks now moved to Harlem. The new uptowners were folks looking to make the best of a New York opportunity. Strivers in the big city's promised land. They were wise. And they were swift. Some were well-educated, others were not. But most of them had a dream. A few slick real estate operators did some blockbusting, scaring whites out, then charging blacks the proverbial arm and a leg to get in. But Harlem was well on its way to becoming the black capital of America. Hundreds of blacks were answering. Thousands more would soon follow. Blacks with jobs, blacks with little more than hope. Wesley Williams, shown here as the postman, became the city's first black fireman. Legend has it that the physical exam this Harlemite took for the job could have broken the back of a weaker man. Life was seldom easy. Uptown had enough trouble to go around town several times.
We did have racial strife. This is nothing new. We had to fight. I've seen men, when I was a little boy, go into the bar right on 19th Street and 120th Street for that matter. Now, they would serve you a drink, but they was insulted why they would break the glass after serving. I've known a lot of people, some men are still living that knows this may have occurred to them.
It's an incident that comes to memory is when old Harlem said, let's go and finish up the war. And the leaders of the 369th Infantry and the band were going around Harlem advocating men to come and join up for a good cause and end the war. Well, of course, all the men of Harlem knew that all the girls like a soldier anyway. So it was a natural thing to become a member of the 369th. 3 brothers of us joined all at one time. But my services were excused because I was working for the depot quartermaster on this side of the water. All the boys did drill and practice, and finally the regiment grew to a sufficient number to warrant going away. But the day that they came back is when Harlem was rejuvenated.
The proud men of the 369th were kept out of American uniforms during the first days of the First World War. The U.S. Army was then for whites only. Harlem soldiers went overseas, though, and fought under the flag of France. The French were glad to have them. They helped make the world safe for democracy and came home a highly decorated American regiment.
The flags waving, the people yelling. I guess I was yelling along with the rest of them. but I was trying to find my brother. And I was standing right in front of the Millionaires Club. And those men from that club were standing in the open windows throwing out handfuls of money. Hands full of money out on the crowd because the houses set far back enough from the street that the money never reached to where the soldiers were. But they was nevertheless throwing out that money, and those soldiers passed by and never batted an eye. Never batted an eye, and I stood looking closely for my own brother, and honestly, I didn't even recognize him when he did. As he told me later, he passed by me as close that he could have reached out and touched me. But those boys paid no attention to anybody except what they were doing. That is marching home. And to see them boys come marching was something that worth millions to see. Fathers, mothers, just overwhelmed, some crying, some just yelling for waving flags just as... It was a sight that Harlem will not see again in a long time.
After the war, two major streams of consciousness developed in Harlem. One in the arts, the other in a distinctly political context. The arts movement was just beginning in the summer of 1921 when a young student from Oklahoma, who would one day become Harlem's most famous poet, stepped from the subway to this corner at 135th Street and Lenox Avenue to take his first look at his creative domain. Langston Hughes simply fell in love with Harlem as he began meeting other poets. This is young County Cullen. And performing artists, Florence Mills, Alberta Hunter, the singer and actress Ethel Waters, composers U.B. Blake and Noble Sissle, a rising young star named Josephine Baker, and a youthful empress of the blues who got into town every now and again, Bessie Smith. There were novelists. This is Claude McKay. And painters and sculptors like Augusta Savage. There was Zora Neale Hurston and Jean Toomer.
And of course, Big Daddy, Paul Robeson. When Paul would come to the streets to sing for his people, when his ears had been deafened by virtue of his own voice, Paul at his brother's church, then up the street here, Mother Zion, Mother A.M.E. Zion, would be in the basement, and the people would come from everywhere, and Paul, the great man he was.
Well, my soul got a happy, and I stayed all day, Mount Zion, on my journey.
The Paul Robeson who had always time to sing for his people and to do everything. In another sense, a type of a Marcus Garvey. It was the Harlem of the Schomburg collection. You could go in there and you saw those giant men who wouldn't mind speaking to you. I'm talking about the giants, the literary giants.
W.E.B. Du Bois and James Weldon Johnson. Du Bois, the highly regarded political philosopher, was also a published novelist. This period came to be called the Harlem Renaissance. Its most durable art, jazz, was all but overlooked by the new uptown sophisticates who felt that only serious creative work should receive their attention. So while the seeds of an especially dramatic decade of American art history were being sown, few masterpieces outside of music would emerge from this renaissance. Blacks and whites met in a new climate of social and aesthetic mutual interest, and both groups probably came away from the encounters with a very different sense of what Harlem and America were really all about. Through these years of the 1920s, Harlem served as a spiritual outpost for some people and a mystical state of mind for others. Harlem was especially alive during the golden 20s. But uptown life wasn't an art form for all people. Black Americans were confronted by racial violence almost every day. An urgent political sense came north with reports of Southern lynchings. But Harlem heard the strong new voice of a charismatic black nationalist from the West Indies, who began speaking of an African homeland for all black people. And Harlem became the headquarters for this man's provocative influence.
Marcus Aurelius Garvey was born in the island of Jamaica in St. Andrews. In 1917, he traveled around the West Indies Islands, South and Central America. Every country he went in, he found the same condition exist among black people, and so he decided to do something about it and founded the organization known as the Universal Negro Improvement Association. My name is James H. Thornhill, known in Harlem as Captain Thornhill. I come to the United States from England June the 2nd, 1919. Live here ever since. I was a seaman. The first night I come here, a fellow brought me from the ship up there on 135th Street. And I saw this man out there, short, stocky, black man, advocating Africa for the Africans at home and abroad. I tell you something that I shook his hand, and it was like electricity going through my body. I joined the organization, and then I become a member, taking literature from this country to South, Central America, Africa, and other countries. Some countries you get locked up for carrying these documents. After he had accumulated enough dues from the thousands of members, he decided that he was going to launch an economic program. And I wish I had the book here to show you the ships he bought. 4 ships. The Yarmouth, the Booker Washington, the Phyllis Wheatley, and the Shady Side.
Garvey was interested not only in people to go back to Africa, but to be some person here as well. Africa don't need nobody over there unless they got something to offer. The Universal Negro Improvement Association was for Negro developing himself economically, spiritually, physically, and not to depend upon no one else for his survival. In other words, Garvey's movement was for black people who had the initiative to get up and do.
There were more corporations started in with his suggestion than any person that I can recollect. And they made money.
And Mr. Garvey was then in 138th Street between Lenox and 7th. He had that whole block. He built up a low-roof building from 7th Avenue to Lenox. I went there and he organized a military auxiliary called the African Legion, the African Royal Guard, the Motor Corps, the African Royal Engineers, and the Juvenile Corps. I joined the military auxiliary, become a sergeant. Then I moved, Mr. Garvey appoint me captain in the African Legion. He held a convention, the first convention in 1920. That was the old Madison Square Garden. There was about 80,000 people in the place.
Fellow citizens of Africa, I greet you in the name of the Universal Negro Improvement Association and African Communities League of the World. You may ask, what organization is that? It is for me to inform you that the Universal Negro Improvement Association is an organization that seeks to unite into one solid body the 400 million Negroes of the world, to link up the 15 million Negroes of the United States of America with the 20 million Negroes of the West Indies, the 40 million Negroes of South and Central America with the 280 million Negroes of Africa for the purpose of bettering our industrial, commercial, educational, social, and political conditions.
Told it as it were, and they accused him of using the mails to defraud. They gave him 2 years in prison.
The high executive that was elected to the convention was standing right there and made the statement. He said, at last, we caged the tiger. And Mr. Garvey replied with a handcuff on his hand. He said, you may have caged the tiger, but my cubs are running loose.
He was deported from here because he was not a citizen. And that broke up him, but his movement went on.
Livable place. It was beautiful. Place was safe. You could go anywhere, and made so many friends, and took pleasure in simple things. And Sunday afternoons, it was quite the thing at 4 o'clock to go walking on 7th Avenue. 7th Avenue was a regular promenade. And we put on our long dresses and our white leghorn hats, and we walk up and down the street and meet each other and talk. And then we would stop into one of the ice cream parlors. At that time, there were many of them. About every 5 or 6 blocks there were, and you stop and have a ice cream soda or a sundae. And then in the evening, very often, we'd meet at each other's homes. At that time, it was a thing for youngsters to take the piano or the violin or something. And I remember in my family there were 5 of us, and 3 of us took piano and 2 of us took violin. And in the evenings on Sunday, we play all those old-time songs and sing them, you know, we'd have fun. And later on, the kids got the ukuleles and they would strum them, and that's how you spend your evenings. And I remember that Reverend Clayton Powell lived right up the street here, and his son Z. Powell he lived up the street, and so many people, some of the boys who became writers and all, lived in the street. And sometimes we'd have these parties, especially the Greek organizations after I got in college and all. At Christmas Eve, you know, from house to house, you start about 10 o'clock, and one house you'd have cocktails, and next you'd have eggnog, and the next one you'd have whatever, and end up at somebody's house with breakfast. I know they ended up at my house for breakfast, the whole gang of us, and we just had a good time. It was really a beautiful time. We didn't lock our doors. We went from each other's house. Like the friends across the street, they were big families too. We'd run into their house, just open the door, go on, is Helen here, you know? And they would come into our house here. It was like a big family, everybody up and down the street. So that this is how I remember Harlem in my youth. I thought it was beautiful.
Every week, the Lafayette Players used to come out with a different show, and Abby Mitchell Cook was the leading lady. Clarence Muse was the leading man, and there was quite a close group which put on excellent plays every week of a different name, a different nature, and some of them were very entertaining. You could just mark their calendar that I've got to be there Saturday night to see Abby Mitchell cook. The Lincoln was in a different category, and it did not attract. Well, amongst every group, there's always a section of a group of people who, when they went out to a theater, they'd dress up and put on their best clothes to go and sit amongst other people dressed up. But it was customary to be ready for a fight if you went to Lincoln. That's all. I can put it just smoothly like that. Be ready for a fight. But by the Lafayette, you were walking in class.
I knew so many show people when I was growing up because my mother had a rooming house round the corner from the Lafayette Theater. And such greats used to be there and down there in the rehearsal hall in my mother's kitchen. And Ethel Waters was one of them. Salem Tut Whitney.
Willie Bryant.
And, oh, yes, Biv, I forgot him. Willie Bryant.
Princess Wee Wee.
Princess Wee Wee and people like that. So, naturally, I wanted to be in show business. So my mother said, no, you can't do it. But a show came up by the name of Green Pastures. And one of the performers that was rehearsing in my mother's kitchen said he was going to take me around there to try to get a part in the play. And Mama said, no, you can't go.
She wouldn't let you go.
No, would she, Bill?
No.
I sneaked around there, didn't I? And finally I got the part. And at that time, they were casting for Cherubs and Zebra, the main character in there, and just a whole lot of people were there. So I went around there and I was selected to do the female part in Green Pastures. I was the only woman principal in the show. And then I stayed with the show for 7 years. I was one of the original cast that made the picture in California.
And you saw this, and you saw that. And this is it.
Oh, that was me.
Tell about it.
Oh, this is? Oh, that was when I was working in the nightclub. And they took my picture there. That's when I was in the nightclub there. And this is one of the original chorus lines of the Alhambra Theater. But I've forgotten some of the other girls, you know, their names and things. Mm-hmm. But this is the way they used to have the chorus at the Alhambra. Now, we had 30 minutes of chorus work and then 30 minutes of drama, you see. And that's the way the shows were run. Well, you go ahead and say something, Viv.
Well, I'm Vivian Harris, and I was born in Harlem, and I worked, so many shows. Let me see now. When I used to work at the Cotton Club, everything was just beautiful. Naturally, they had all white patronage. They had colored waiters and colored entertainers. And I opened up there with Duke Ellington. Nothing but light girls. They didn't employ any real dark girls at that time. They had two, Emma Smith and a girl named Dookie. And they would be on the end, but they would be clowning. And that's why they took those. They had a chorus of about 16 dancing girls and about 10 showgirls. Some would just wear beautiful costumes with the big feathers. Nearly all the people that ran the Cotton Club were gangsters, most of them. But, you know, and then as they were eliminated, gangsterism had a contract on them. That was the way that they were demised. So therefore, there was no more Cotton Club, and it closed. That was the first one. And then they had some more downtown, but I wasn't in those downtown. I was in the Apollo Theater working at that time. I had enough of that one. I stayed there for about 5 years. I worked there. We had some beautiful times there.
white tourists never saw Harlem beyond the comforting atmosphere in its entertainment palaces. For blacks who lived uptown, and even those who didn't, Harlem life wasn't just tap shoes and the ricochet of nightclub laughter. Yet on some nights, it must have seemed that the music would just play on forever while the dancing never stopped. But change was coming. Days of rage and grief and victory. But even as tastes changed and politics evolved, there would always be a Harlem sound that keeps the time.
Johnson, your work of late is...
If there's a broken heart for every light on Broadway, Harlem's got to have at least one storyteller for every street lamp uptown. The storyteller speaks everywhere in Harlem. The story is long. Harlem's been many places, many people too. Some were here and are gone. Some will never leave. By the early 1930s, Central Harlem was almost entirely black, as folks from the South and all over the rest of America flocked toward the Fable above 110th Street. The legend of Harlem just kept on growing. Its streets hummed big city music, and its avenues became boulevards, where styling and profiling were treasured ways of life.
When I was a kid, as far as I was concerned, there was two Harlems. The Harlem that I lived in, which most people call the Valley, and the other Harlem, which was up on top of the hill, St. Nicholas Terrace, Edgecombe Avenue, and Sugar Hill. And for some reason, the people up on the hill seemed to be more prominent, and I guess they had more money, but most of the people up on the hill seemed like they had a different air about the way they looked and walked and dressed and stuff like that. They would always look great. I mean, they would come down off that hill. I mean, they were clean. Really, they were coming down to go to the theaters or some dance hall. And it was a different type of Harlem. I mean, it was hustle and bustle.
Most of the kids in the neighborhood had their own little shoe shine box, and we used to go up under the L on 8th Avenue. You know, you made yourself a couple of dollars, but there was always some kind of way you could make some dough. You know, at one time they used to have all these photographers on the street corners. They would take your pictures on this white pony. In fact, I had a white pony that the guys at the police station gave me. You know, that block in Harlem became the world of me.
In the community I'm known as Bill Ward. I've been in Harlem for about 52 years, and during that time I've really seen Harlem change. I've lived in the house 31 East, a few doors away, for about 37 years. When I was a kid, if you left 5th Avenue going east, you could count the blacks on your fingers that was in that area of 125th Street. And Mount Morris Park, the blacks didn't go in there when I was a kid for fear that they would get beat up by the Irish or what have you. All of these streets up in Central Harlem and East Harlem, 124th Street all the way up to like 140th Street, all in the side streets. When I was a kid going to school in the 30s, you would see signs dangling from the stoops saying apartments to let, and they would, in big letters, say white only. And no one made a protest. They just walked away and looked for another building that would say tenants wanted, colored or either tenants wanted, and no description of who they would want. And that was a way of life. They had the theaters segregated. The Lower Victoria Theater was strictly for whites, and the Lower 7th Avenue was for the black people. And if a black would go up to Lower Victoria, they would tell them that they were all sold out, that the same picture was playing over the Lower 7th Avenue. And the people would gently walk away, but if they were to stand at the curb, they would see a white couple come up, get a ticket, and go right in. And they had the Child's Restaurant, I believe, on 8th Avenue and 125th Street, where they didn't tell you that they didn't serve blacks or colored, but if you went in to eat, you would just sit there and just wait and wait and wait until you got disgusted, then you would walk out. 125th Street, when I was a kid, the black people were allowed to purchase items in the stores, but they were not allowed to work as clerks in the stores. And the black women were not allowed to try on hats. They would have to know what size hat they would wear, and they would put on that hat, and they would have to buy it. And over on the west side of Harlem, over by the St. Nicholas Projects, that was predominantly white, and the gangs would chase the blacks out from up in that area. They had a gang that was called the LaSalle and Hancock Street Gang. And we got chased one day, and we didn't have time to stop. We had to jump over the big gate, the big fence in that park in order to get away. But once we could get over the other side of 8th Avenue, we'd be safe, because that was black territory.
East Harlem was an Italian community for a number of years. Some parts of it still remain, keeping their own time, their own mood. Spanish-speaking folks started moving into this part of Italian Harlem during the 1920s. A lot of the uptown story belongs here, and it's still being told.
I'm Peter Pascal. I remember Harlem as I grew up on 121st Street, where I was born in 1914.
Mi nombre es Isabel Méndez. Recuerdo a Harlem cuando vine a vivir de Puerto Rico a Nueva York en el 1925. We moved to 26 Lenox Avenue. And we were the first Spanish-speaking people moving to that house, Puerto Rican. And the lady come and asked me, where did you come from? And I said, we're from Puerto Rico. She said, oh my, you people moving in here already? So I say, yes, and more coming. And right away, a lot of people begins to move from the building. Puerto Rican people begins to move in the house. We buy the church in 114 and 7th Avenue that used to be a synagogue and was closed for many, many years. So we get it on credit. So the first Spanish real church was that one, La Milagrosa. Was when I come from Puerto Rico. I come to live 26 Lenox Avenue. And there was that where I met my handsome husband. And we married there in that house, 26 Lenox.
In those days, we didn't have the accommodations that we have today. We were all living in cold water flats. And we would go out and get the wood, get the ice for the ice box. And we confronted a lot of problems. After all, we were the immigrants coming in. Not me, but my father, which came here at the turn of the century. And at home, we spoke nothing but Italian. And as time went on, we moved from one street to another. Finally moved on 116th Street, was adjacent to the settlement house. It started in a two-room apartment in 1898, and the whole movement was to help that particular time the Italian immigrants, because they, number one, they couldn't speak the language, and number two, they had to become American citizens. We had to really be on our own when we were in the street, and we had an awful lot of problems at that particular time. We had an awful lot of Irish who lived in the area, and it seemed as the Italians were moving into the area, we were displacing the Irish people at that time. And then we had an awful lot of battle royals, and there were street fights in those days in order to survive. However, as the years went on, we started to adjust ourselves to what was left of the Irish. We practically chased them all out of the area at that particular time.
I was born at 2437 8th Avenue, was baptized in St. Aloysius Parish. And my wife, Peggy Reardon, was born at 142nd Street and 8th Avenue and baptized in St. Charles Parish. As a younger child, I spent practically every summer day in this park, St. Nicholas Park. In 1926, I started grammar school at St. Joseph's School on 127th Street and Morningside Avenue. This was a very bad period economically, and money was short. But 125th Street was a great opportunity to window shop. Of course, I was never in the market for a diamond ring or a wristwatch. You'd go past Howard's clothing store, $22.50 to buy a suit. My first job was delivering the Bronx Home News. Would you believe that my first route commenced at 126th Street and Morningside Avenue and went east to St. Nicholas Terrace and then up St. Nicholas Terrace to 128th. This has a significant attachment. This was a black neighborhood, and I was a white newsboy delivering the Bronx Home News. Since I was born, our lavatory was out in the hall shared by our next-door neighbor. So we moved uptown to 135th Street on Amsterdam Avenue, known as Vinegar Hill, and got a private bath and steam heat rather than coal. When I was a teenager, We had the Breffney Hall, which was an Irish dance hall, which really rocked on Friday and Saturday and Sunday night. The Breffney Hall conducted dances for really the people who were born and brought up in Ireland. We didn't have gangs in those days as we know the word gangs today, but I belonged to the Pepsi-Cola Boys, and it was a clique of boys that hung out on the corner of 135th Street and Convent Avenue, just 3 blocks from this present site. And there was a camera store on the corner and a candy store right next to it. And the candy store was the focal point of our attention, where we started out each evening making a purchase, occasionally a cigarette at a penny apiece, and then we eventually wound up on the corner. We did not have too many hobbies, but I got a box camera as a gift. And I always liked to take pictures. Some of the other cliques were called the Flanagan Boys on 136th Street in Amsterdam. We had the Old Broadway group, and then each street had a clique. There was a social thing, fellowship. We hung out together. We played together. We competed together. It was really competition. We played the other groups: basketball, baseball, football, ice hockey, roller hockey, stickball, boxball. On my left is the High School of Music and Art, which has given us many, many great musicians and talented students in the music and art field. On my right is one of the first buildings that City College constructed. And in between is Jasper Oval, and I am sitting in left field. I am sitting in right field.
One time, our oldest son and I were on the IRT Broadway subway, and the train slowed down when it left the 125th Street station, and we were standing up against the door, and I said, would you believe it, Bruce? I lived in that house right down there when I was 12. And he looked at me, and he said, you lived there, Mother? And I said, yeah, I lived there. In fact, I didn't even live in the apartments upstairs. I lived down in the cellar. And he couldn't get over this. That, you know, he's always known a suburban life. And then Mother would ever have lived underneath an elevated and in the basement besides. The reason we moved into New York and were living in Harlem was because the Depression came, so we were superintendents and janitors. And that's when we moved into underneath the L. In fact, we lived in that house when Roosevelt became president. And I remember the stores, the Moylan Avenue Grocery, putting up NRA signs when the National Recovery Act, you know, we all did our part and the Eagle came out. They had a Hooverville down by Riverside Drive along the shacks where people used to actually live that were indigent and without jobs. But it was a good time. You could walk down 125th Street, and black or white or anybody, they'd laugh and talk to each other and, you know, just say hi. And nobody lived in fear of anyone else. And yet we were all pretty, you know, poor.
Human skin of every color was bruised by the Great Depression. A lot of pockets contained nothing but empty hands. Uptown, the blues just vamped like a second national anthem. It wasn't that hope was ever completely lost in Harlem. But sometimes it could get squeezed awfully thin.
Shops were 19 cents a pound. You know, you get 4 cent shop, it cost you about a quarter. You could buy potatoes, rice, you usually had a little bread, and you could buy 5 cents worth of greens, and people, and I'm just tell you how they did it. And they bought 5 cents worth of bacon ends to give their greens seasonings. And therefore, 4 people could sit down and have a decent dinner at night. So this is how we made it during the Depression. See, we've been making it. Ain't nobody in this United States of the world could beat us making it, though. We done making this. People ever been since said, let's make it.
Now, don't let me tell you that Harlem was a paradise. It was a Harlem of hunger. I know you would say, with the Father Divine. This is the kind of Harlem that made Father Divine so strong, so meaningful to the community. And people look at him as totally negative because they didn't agree with his religious pretension.
Every time I used to hear about Father Divine, I used to see the parade of all the followers, Divine's followers. And these ladies all dressed up in white. When I was about 7 years old, my mother sent me down to the Father Divine restaurant on 126th Street. And she more or less told me, go down and get food for the family. And she gave me 50 cents. As I ran up the stairs, a man greeted me with the words, peace, brother, peace truly wonderful. And I went into this huge, it was like a hall, and all these tables were lined up with people, and everybody was eating on these white tablecloths with silver dishes and things. And over in the corner there was a counter in which you can take out dinners. And at the counter, for 50 cents, I had enough money. 50 cents bought 4 plates of food, actually. I couldn't get over that.
You are filled with the spirit of enthusiasm by the recognition of God's presence as the great manifester of scientific truth as it was spoken by Jesus.
His name had once been George Baker. In Harlem, he became a living God and said, feed the hungry, give clothing to the naked, provide shelter. In its own way, the work of Father Divine was a modern miracle. He fed Americans who were starving in the nation's collapsed economy. There was divine coal for their freezing winters, and divine work in hundreds of self-help businesses he started for his faith and for his faithful.
But I want to thank Father tonight that he came and saw fit to lift me out of rising time. Don't I want to thank him tonight?
He was preacher and showman, worshipped by a flock that refused to hear other churchmen who saw nothing godly in Father Divine.
Father Divine, the Negro God of Harlem, is the center of attention in this country and abroad. Now, as his various heavens increase in number, the cult leader is charged with felonious attack in connection with the stabbing affray. His arrest precedes his return to face charges in New York.
Is there anything you would care to say at this time?
I don't care to make any statement just now.
I can appreciate that,
Mr.
Attorney.
Even to the prison, his people follow him in such a scene as hard-boiled police have seldom witnessed. Freed on bail, he is greeted with unbounded enthusiasm. The faithful shield him with a coat and push him through the throng. Then it's off to Harlem.
Divine told an interviewer that he had never actually been born, but had combusted himself into life one morning at the corner of 130th Street and Lenox Avenue. Well, but to these witnesses, he was the true savior. He was jailed briefly on charges that his church created a public nuisance. In court, his followers insisted he was God. The judge who sentenced him mysteriously dropped dead weeks later, though apparently in excellent health. I hated to do it, sighed Father Divine from his jail cell. This man who made himself divine in Harlem passed away on September 7th, 1965. But to the angels in his various heavens, he lived.
Before the whites came into the number business, It was known as the Black Penny game. I think it's the year 1929. A banker of that stature of that time was Caspar Holstein. They kidnapped him, and they asked for the total sum of $50,000. And the money was there the next day. That opened up the eyes of the white gangster. Says that's not a penny ante game. But a man can come up with $50,000 cash money that quick. The numbers is a business, and it employs thousands of people. People depend upon it as you depend upon your daily job. It's a derivative from the Louisiana lottery, that's what it was. And this man improvised it. And we used to take the reports from the New York Stock Exchange. And went along, I think, up until 1928. I'm speaking from 1920. I know the numbers. And the Metropolitan Life Insurance Company come out with a protest that the blacks were taking the insurance money and playing numbers with. So they got to the powers that be of the stock exchange, and to see it today, that the stock exchange numbers are mostly their deals in even figure zeros. So therefore, that was no good. They taken from that, and they started using what they call the U.S. Treasury balance. And some of the slickers found out that they could get it a day in advance. And so naturally, that had to stop. Then they came up with the New York, I call it not New York, but the pari-mutuel betting. But it's the honestest gamble that the poor man for his nickels and dimes can have. Or the poor man's stock market. I'm sure people have heard that phrase. Now, they have bad eggs in anything worth millions of dollars. But the basic number writer has as much integrity to bring you your money if you hit as any broker that will give you your dividends from your investments on the stock market. There's thousands of people in Harlem don't play numbers, but it's a common thing. I've taken numbers out of necessity, and I've made a living out of numbers, because it was a job. I had a good reputation. If you hit with Wilbur, you're going to get paid. I know other men the same. I can name you. I don't want to mention their names, but I know slews of men that they were just as honest and as much integrity as any man that walk on God's green earth. I'm not going to limit it.
But the numbers weren't about to save everybody uptown, or even most folks. Like the rest of America facing a depression, Harlem needed jobs.
The jobs that we had, nobody wanted. And when there was no jobs, no place else, anybody would start fighting us for our jobs. So we had to have something. So then Roosevelt come up with a relief situation. So this is why only in urban America that we are the dominating factor in the relief situation, because the amount of money we get as being on relief from the Depression is not enough money, as a fellow once said, to buy a Natter racing jacket if they made it in short sleeves.
You could spend a half a day. The line would go from 5th Avenue to Madison Avenue, 104th, and it'd go around the corner to 105th Street. That was the line. And you would go through the basement and come home with the big pound of butter, a little coffee, flour, oatmeal.
The welfare, they help the people the most they can, you know.
President Roosevelt's relief situation included the Works Projects Administration, the WPA, a program offering several seasons of hope to disillusioned people across America. Harlem folks picked up tools and went out to take care of business.
Now wake up, boys. Get out on the rock. It ain't daybreak, but it's 4 o'clock.
Oh, no, Pop. You know that ain't the play.
What you talking about? It's the WPA.
Oh, the WPA.
Now, I said that.
WPA.
The WPA was only a chapter in the American dream, in the mighty frontier stretching out.
I know the Harlem when education was at the premium. Irrespective of age, every night you could see people walking up the hills to City College. You could see people trying to hop the subway, going down to 43rd Street to the Mechanics Institute, trying to get drafting, architectural as well as mechanical drawings. You can see people going at the YMCA and YWCA to take courses, all kinds of educational courses. And I don't mean just teenagers. I mean people who are as much as 70, 80. People who had retired, so to speak, were going to get education. Education was a must among the African Americans from the South and the African Caribbean people from the Caribbean and those from the North right here. Teachers wrote notes to the parents, and it was a Harlem where the parents tore you up if you did bad in school, and will take you to school and tear you up in there.
In this category existed the arts projects, which included painting, sculpture, anything you wanted to learn, you had the opportunity. You know, in churches, schools, you had poetry, you could go to the theater. And some of the people who ran certain projects were people like Orson Welles, Joseph Cotton. And later I was teaching in Harlem because they set up what was called the Harlem Art Center, was a place on the corner of 125th Street and Lenox Avenue. It housed a gallery and about 15 little places that taught ceramics, rug making, weaving, lithography, and sculpture. And today, some of what I know, I owe to WPA.
Tyrant, show thy face. I cannot strike at wretched burns, whose arms are higher to bear their stead. If thou beest slain and with no stroke of mine, my wife and children's ghosts will haunt thee still.
In this contribution to the American theater and in other projects under the Works program, we have set our feet on the road toward a brighter future.
But the dream ended. Maybe the government was embarrassed by the need for a WPA in the first place, so it was dismantled and closed down. The frontier lights just faded.
I'm so tired, don't know what to do. Can't get fired, so I take my best until my work is through. WPA, WPA, don't mind the boss if he's cross when you're gay. He'll get a pink slip next month anyway. 3 little letters that make life okay. WPA.
It was the Harlem, of course, of the protest movement had started Du Bois. Of course, Du Bois and Garvey had started at it from the turn of the century. But it had gone on beyond that. It was the Harlem of the Ben Davis. The attempt of the Communist Party of America to get a good foothold in Harlem, because it was the Harlem that we were coming out of the Scottsboro case, Scottsboro Brothers case. And so the Du Bois clubs and the different clubs that came out, the ALP, the American Labor Party with Vito Marcantonio, the rise of Adam Powell. Of course, the Harlem Labor Union coming out of that. The struggle at 125th Street to make the various white stores there open their doors to serve African American people, to serve. And I didn't say to get a job even yet, just to serve. It was the Harlem that you even had to fight to get blacks to ride, and the upstairs bus. You know, there used to be the 2-story bus, and we could ride downstairs, but we couldn't ride upstairs in the open thing. And then there was the campaign to get blacks people in the subway as subway attendants and then motormen and so forth.
At one time, you couldn't get a job on 125th Street. I wouldn't care if you had a PhD. You'd be the porter, but you couldn't be a salesman. And this gentleman by the name of Sufi, he came from Chicago here, stated, "Don't buy where you can't wait."
Jobs were scarce, and the racial scene was ugly when Harlem's anger spilled over into street violence during March of 1935. The battle was on between Harlem and Harlem's authorities. It all started when a 16-year-old black youngster named Lino Rivera was rumored to have been beaten to death by a couple of floor walkers in a Harlem department store.
Well, I came out of the theater at 2 o'clock and went to the 5 and 10 cent store. I picked up a knife and put it in my pocket. The floor walker caught me. He put the knife back in its place and then he started shoving me out the store. So I told him to quit shoving. So he says, "Don't get fresh, kid." So I told him, "All right, well, don't push me anymore." And he says to the other fellow, "Come on, let's take him down the cellar and beat the heck out of him." So after that, the police officers came, they took my name, and then they sent me home. At 2 a.m., they called for me again, and I didn't know anything of a riot or anything, but they thought that I was dead.
In 1935, a bigger conflict was getting underway. And for many folks living uptown, the issues and the responsibilities were very clear.
There was a very strong feeling in the United States among Americans of African ancestry, sense of unity of people united against a war that was a fascist war against people of Africa. We had a march from 23rd Street in Harlem, which brought in about 150,000 people. This was a united effort by all people. It wasn't just a black march. This was a march of trade unionists, social workers, religious people of a variety of interests, and it was something to really behold.
And for the first time, the myth that African American and African Caribbean people had no relationship with the Africans at home in the continent, that myth had been dispelled. Blacks were proud of being blacks for the first time in a long time.
What's your age, Mr. Anderson?
37.
37. What is your weight?
150 pounds.
Height?
5'3".
Just what is your profession?
I'm a physician.
Physician. And then why would you want to go over in Ethiopia?
Well, I feel it's my duty to give my profession and, if necessary, my life in the cause of Ethiopia.
And I the soil and be happy to die for the defense of entire Africa, including Abyssinia.
That's fine. Sign right here on the dotted line.
Hubert Julian, a professional soldier of fortune from Harlem, trained troops to defend the small African country from Mussolini's invaders. The rest of the world seemed to be turning away from the Ethiopians. Emperor Haile Selassie appealed to the League of Nations for help. The League offered none. World War II was in the wings.
When I was very young, I was born in Harlem Hospital in 1924, when it was a very different place than it is now, for many reasons.
My father came from New Orleans. My mother came from Maryland. We were in effect a Southern family, a Southern community, really, just driven from the land, you know. And we were raised that way. Southern, at the risk of using a difficult word, also means African, in the sense that everybody's child belonged to the community. We were all responsible for each other. And Harlem was not then an entirely black community. There were Finnish people living down 2 blocks away. An Italian boy living next door. They had a grocery store. And he and I fought every single campaign of the Ethiopian-Italian War in the street. He thought he was. Well, first of all, you got to remember that in school, no one tells you anything about your history. Everything I discovered about Booker T. Washington, you know, who was vaguely mentioned in school. Frederick Douglass, not at all. Marcus Garvey, not at all. Africa, not at all. As far as I knew when I was growing up, officially speaking, I was a lucky savage who had been saved by the Christians, who had come to Africa to save me from meeting my uncles. That is what we were taught. I'm stubborn. I went to the Schomburg collection. Why I went to the Schomburg collection on 35th Street, I'll never know. But I went there. And I read every single book in that library. Every book. I know this because when I was 13, they had to give me a card to go downtown. I read myself out of 2 Harlem libraries, on 24th Street and 35th Street. I read everything. Didn't know what to make of it, but I read it. And when I was crossing 5th Avenue, 42nd Street, on my way to the 42nd Street Library, and the cop, traffic cop, said to me, 13-year-old boy, never forget this. Why don't you niggas stay at the town where you belong? And maybe then I began to wonder in another way about my country. Maybe again when I was knocked from my back when I was 10. When I was 10, I looked 10. You know, I was a kid. That may be the first time I realized the world into which I was born. And more than that, my first dim apprehension, my mother and my father were going through. And I do know this. For the first time, I got frightened for my brothers and my sisters.
Lewis following him up and lashing out with his left hand every now and then, and there was a hard left to Snelling, but Lewis came back and gave Lewis a terrific right hand to the jaw. Lewis ducked, put up his gloves. Snelling bent low and tried to bring up a right uppercut to straighten him, but he missed and came up on the side of Lewis's head. And then Snelling stepped back and shot a hard right hand to Lewis's jaw that landed flush and made Lewis step into the clinch. Then Donovan broke them. Snelling got over 2 more hard rights to Lewis's jaw and made Lewis give ground. And there, Snelling straightened up Lewis with hard rights and lefts to the jaw. He has puffed up Lewis's left cheek, and Lewis is down, hanging to the rope. He is a very tired fighter. He is blinking his eyes, shaking his head. The count is done. The fight is over. The fight is over.
On the night I was graduated from high school, I was walking through Harlem. I was completely dejected because my family had no money, and it didn't seem likely that I'd be going to college, even to one of the city colleges. And as I passed a bar, an Italian chap was sitting there with the chair tilted back, and just as I got there, he jumped to his feet and he smacked his fist into the palm of his other hand, and he says, "At last they got that black son of a bitch." Of course, I ran. I was always a quick starter, and I thought that he had something against me for some reason. But all he was talking about was Max Schmeling had apparently knocked out Joe Louis, and he'd been listening to the radio.
Joe Louis carried many of Harlem's dreams along with him every time he climbed into the ring. When he lost to that tough German heavyweight Max Schmeling, every punch that landed on Joe staggered Harlem too. No one ever had to say, "Win for us, Joe. Win for those of us who try so damn hard but never seem to win anything." Joe knew. Harlem did too. It was waiting time. Waiting for Joe Louis to lift Harlem's spirits up high again.
Sing like Joe and rock 'em all to sleep.
A whole honor of a whole despised people was redeemed. He was the only hero we had. When Joe Louis won a fight, everybody in Harlem, including my sanctified father, was in heaven. People beat tin pans, frying pans, went wild.
National Collectors Mint is releasing an
King's Shoe Store, which was one of the early stores, and they opened on 7th Avenue. They went over to 70 West 125th Street and had to buy the building before they could get into the business itself.
It was the Harlem, of course, of the protest movement. The struggle at 125th Street to make the various white stores there open their doors to serve African American people, to serve, and instead to get a job even yet.
I'm a Cuban by birth. I came to New York in 1927 with the anticipation of becoming a civil engineer. I had heard a great deal about liberty, freedom, and equality, and because of that, I became interested in the welfare of my fellow men around me, and seeing the serious situation that was about in the community at that time. The merchant community was treating the people of the community in a very shabby way, and knowing Adam Powell for some time, I got together with Adam, A. Philip Randolph, Lloyd Ines, and we set up what was known as the Greater New York Coordinating Committee for Employment. At that time, 125th Street was a very thriving business community, and many times as I go down to 86th Street and see how it's alive today, that was 125th Street in Harlem in the days of old. We asked the merchants, after many, many efforts, to employ black people, men, male and female, and they refused to. The only available positions were those of menial areas they were in, so that what we had to do was to develop tactics. The phone company was turning to the dial concept, and instead of allowing the dial to maintain itself, we were able to get thousands of people to dial so that it disrupted their works, and they had to put on more people to do this kind of, to respond to the dialing, you see. And later on, they saw the wisdom of what we were doing, and they also fell in line. Con Edison would not do anything, and we did the same thing with them, only in a little different way. We'd carry, if your bill was a $30 bill, we'd carry $30 worth of pennies and have them count these pennies out. We'd have them send people to check the meters, and we carried on a lot of harassing tactics which were necessary. And they saw the wisdom of this, and they, of course, immediately put people on. That was not enough. And the churches, together with the community and civic organizations, we got together and decided on an action day, so to speak. Well, we were able to turn out about 5,000 people who became a picketing body. Baby carriages, senior citizens, people from the theater, and in those days 125th Street was live with theater and action. The chorus girls, and the business person who was in sympathy with us. Well, we had a picket line from the river to river, and we closed every single store on 125th Street. That was on or about the 5th of August 1938 that we did this. And it had a tremendous impact all across the country. But what happened was that on the August the 6th and the 8th, we sat down and agreed on a Harlem Compact. The Harlem Compact said that we would not throw whites out of jobs, but that as they leave, we wanted our people placed in. There were a number of jobs open at the time, and we had our people placed in these jobs. At first, they were wary about whom we would send in, and they would say to us, send us the light ones, and we said, we'll send you what we have, and we sent you dark ones and light ones together because they were all human beings and all God's people. You see what I mean? So that effective thereof, we were able to, for the first time, integrate black people into the economy of the community, and by so doing, into the economy of the city of New York.
Adam Clayton Powell, Jr. was the son of a noted Harlem minister. Young Powell followed his father into the pulpit of Abyssinian Baptist Church, and he also took another path for himself, through the world of politics. He was the first black city councilman in New York, and later served Harlem for over 20 years in the United States Congress. Some folks thought he was too flamboyant in his personal style, or maybe too handsome, or too ambitious. But Adam, as everybody in Harlem called him, made life different in his community. He took on the powers that had made discrimination a habit even along the symbolic heart line of Harlem, 125th Street. Adam fought, and he won. Later in his life, the House of Representatives censured him, and that was a defeat. But for the years he was able to, Adam took care of home. For his time, Adam Clayton Powell was Harlem.
You're not wise, not nice. They sparkle and they bubble. They're gonna get you in a whole lot of trouble. Oh, sister, talking about those eyes, and it's sweet little bubble, bubble, people there, little boy. Put it little bubble, 125th Street was 125th Street, man. Everything was happening, and there was no hassle. And all the theaters were making money. The Alhambra, which is 126th and 7th, the Harlem Opera House on 125th, even the Lowe's Victoria, man, the Apollo. Then we had the Orient here, and the Franklin down here. All these theaters, and everybody. And you know another theater we forgot. See, it's coming back to me on that. The Lincoln on 35th Street. You remember the Lincoln? And the talent those days. Now you have a lot of talent today, but it was so overwhelming. Then everybody was multi-talented. It wasn't just they known for one thing or something. They were great, and it was hard to choose who was the best. Pete Peaches and Duke was the classiest act in show business. And there was the Miller Brothers and Lois. Now, Alice Whitman was the dancingest woman. At that time, they were comparing the Whitman sisters with Ruby Keeler and Eleanor Powell. And Eleanor Powell, they were top names in the dance. And then they had Stump and Stumpy. And Dynamite Hooker. Eddie Rector, supposed to be one of the greatest the world has ever known. And I don't know if you heard the Nicholas brothers. They were fantastic too. They spent a lot of time over in Europe, touring Europe. Snake Hips Tucker. Look, you wouldn't think he had a bone in his body, even when he walked, when he danced. All these guys was down there. You run into them anytime down in the Officers Club. They were all down there practicing. They'd been in their sweatshirts, and they dance all day and then go that night and do their show or do their gigs in the clubs. Another fantastic dancer, Bojangles Zorowski. He was a star in his own right, and he was one of our toppest black stars. You know, he was able to run faster backwards than the average person could frontwards. He'd run backwards. And he never wore taps on his shoes like the average tap dancer. He had about 50 brand new pairs of shoes.
125th Street never quite became heaven, but one of its entertainment palaces was a bright and glittering star. Headquarters for black performance, from blues to bebop, from show dancing to real black comedy, was the Apollo.
I was called the voice of the Apollo Theater. I used to stand backstage and make all the announcement of the incoming shows that was to be in the Apollo. I also worked on the stage with every comedian that came to the Apollo. This is Crackshot and myself doing a scene from one of the skits that we had at the time. That's a whiskey bit.
Whiskey
We had a
bit,
whiskey
yeah.
bit. I worked with them. Rochester, George Wiltshire, Johnny Bargle, Pygmy. And when the Apollo was really going great, we had the midnight show with all the big stars from Harlem used to come up and help us out. Everybody. You could name it. We have it. Believe me.
They used to have an amateur hour every Wednesday night at the Apollo. I guess everybody heard about it. That amateur hour was international. I mean, and they had a guy there that used to run the amateur hour called Puerto Rico. Yeah, Puerto Rico. Well, I met Puerto Rico when we were first appeared there. I'd heard about this Puerto Rico man. He'd get you with the hook, you know what I mean? And I wanted to see him in action. He'd come out in them drawers and pull that out to that. He was fantastic, wasn't he? It was fantastic. But that second balcony loved Puerto Rico. The second balcony in the Apollo, they let you know. They would really let you know where it was at. You had to get it from the muscle, from the practice. Hours and hours and hours. Why? Because the competition was so keen. I don't know if they had the amateur hour, with the way the kids are today, I don't even know if they paid any money, just let them go and do their thing. But at that time, you had to come right. You had to really come right, or the second balcony would cut your paycheck.
American music and the great bands playing it have drawn inspiration from Harlem. A great force of style was always here, and artists of the stature of Jimmy Lunsford, Duke Ellington, Count Basie, Louis Armstrong, Roy Eldridge, Earl Hines, and the drummer Chick Webb left their individual and powerful influences uptown and around the world.
And my brother-in-law was playing with Chick Webb. So I went up there every night, because they were building the band over the radio in those days. There was no television. And imagine Ella Fitzgerald with that sweet voice, that sweet disposition. She was a baby, 17 or 18 years old. And I live in the suburb from 8 to 4 o'clock in the morning. Although Susie Q, Big Apple, Jitterbug, you name it. My first band. That's the reason. I played 1941, 42, 43, until they closed. They was eating more for what we were playing. And it was so full of life. And there was a combination, our rhythm section with the American harmony. Jazz was created in the United States by blacks. But there was something missing that we had. I know the blacks from across the street, they come with something that the blacks living in this part of the country. If we made a combination, there was a perfect marriage like my wife and I. And they received that all of black guy and white and Chinese, whatever there was in the palais, they were jumping all over the place. They make you sweat, they make you, give you the best, because they were so receptive.
They had a tree outside of the Hookers Club. They called it the Tree of Hope. You might have heard of that. They said if you touch that tree, you'd be successful in show business. And they rub all the bark off the tree. People, they'd be rubbing, they'd come from all over the East Coast to rub the Tree of Hope. They'd walk all the way from 125th Street all the way up to 131st Street to rub that Tree of Hope before they went on. Especially the amateur night at the Apollo. So that was a suspicion. And they, all the way up till they tore the Lafayette down. And then they uprooted the Tree of Hope and they planted it out there on 7th Avenue. And people still rub it, I guess, till today. They're rubbing this Tree of Hope.
let me explain one thing. In coming up in Harlem, you have a lot of people say, well, it was hard times and things, but hell, it was hard times for us when it was good times.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So it didn't make no difference. We didn't notice the change in the economic ladder because we were at one stationary plateau. But then the war came along and changed everything. But then they started rationing food, something we had never heard of, rationing. So they had blue stamps for dairy products, red stamps for meat,
White stamps for gas,
milk,
water,
eggs. The men went away to war, and the women went to work in the defense plant.
The Second World War reached into Harlem and tightened its grip on the men and women of the community. Uptown people served America with much patriotism, and again, they were segregated in the armed forces.
In 1941, Mayor LaGuardia felt that there should be a USO in Harlem, and he drafted me from the position as business manager of the YMCA to set up a branch of the USO in Harlem. We selected a building, renovated the building, furnished it with offices, dining room, recreation room, library, dormitory, and a roof garden for dancing. We had a staff of about 17 and volunteers of about 400 who assisted in the entertainment of as many as 30,000 men and women of the armed forces a month. Lena Horne was a frequent contributor to that program.
He'll look at me and smile, I'll understand, and then in a little while he'll take my hand, and though it seems absurd, I know we both won't say a word. Maybe I shall meet him.
The uptown scene was crowded, though. There were soldiers on leave, checking out the legend, and workers with fat defense plant paychecks, just letting the good times roll.
Won't you bother with me? Yes, I'm an evil gas.
But one day, the fun stopped.
In 1943, the guys from 126th Street and I were in the same vacant lot. In this lot, we usually played little war games, the Americans against the Japanese, and somehow the dark guys were the Japanese and the light guys were the Americans. But other than playing war games, we used to play baseball. That was our biggest sport in this vacant lot. But one day, while I was pitching for the team, we heard this gunshot. And all the guys from the team dropped the equipment and climbed over the fence, and it ran up towards the Braddock Hotel. So we looked in the hotel lobby, and we didn't see anybody lying down. But what we did see was this white policeman and this black soldier having an argument. And this woman ran out of the hotel, said, "Oh, he shot my son, he shot my son." So the guys from the corner, they ran in there to see what was going on. And then they saw a cop and this soldier standing there. And a little guy named Boo Boo climbed in the window, and he discovered that the bullet wound was in the soldier's shoulder. So they chased the cop inside the elevator. And by that time, a lot of people started running into the hotel to find out what went on. So then the word got out that a white policeman had shot this black soldier. Well, that whole day, up and down the street, you saw people wandering. And finally, what had happened, the policemen, they came and rescued the other policemen out of the hotel that day. And they brought him down, and I understand that they took the soldier to Sydenham Hospital. But by that time, somebody had said that the soldier was dead. They thought he had died. And I didn't know any better, but the thing that happened, my mother said, "Hey, come upstairs and get off the street because things look like they're getting ready to break out." That night, looking out the window, she couldn't see things too clear. So the only thing I can recall is all during the night you can hear glass breaking and gunshots. I don't know who was shooting, but that's all you heard. And people running up and down, screaming on the streets and stuff like that. Then we kept hearing, people talking about, wasn't that a shame, shooting a soldier?
Mayor LaGuardia seems shocked. Harlem wasn't. The mayor later declared most of Harlem off-limits to servicemen. Uptown folks weren't surprised. Certainly the man on the left wasn't. Walter White of the NAACP knew about nightstick justice. So did Harlem. But when the war ended, Harlem celebrated along with the rest of the country. Democracy had been preserved again. Of course, the term democracy meant many things uptown.
I went to the YMCA in Harlem simply because it was the cheapest and the safest place for me to stay. I remember Henry Parks, the Park Sausage was there. Leonard Evans, who used to run Tuesday. A guy named Booker Brown. Cecil Lane, who was a photographer. And most of us were broke. And we would find a waitress and drive a waitress, and that's the way we ate. Got our breakfasts and lunches, They were memorable days. And I never will forget the YMCA because it saved my life for several years.
I remember Harlem in the 40s. We used to turn around and be up on the rooftop. We used to bring our blankets up.
You had nothing to do after 4:30, 5 o'clock. It got a little cool, went up on the roof, sat on down, and took it easy. Some guys had pigeon coops on the roof. They'd come up and feed the pigeons. And
they fly out kites.
Fly kites from off the
and
roof.
Everything, We used to have the girls come up, the girls would come up and take a blanket and lay down, make make lemonade and all this stuff, We didn't have no Kool-Aid then, we had lemonade. And we used to stay up there to the end, in the middle of the night. I can't say what all the action that went on, but,
And the greatest thing in the world was the fire escape.
That's right.
Because when the cops used to chase you over the roof before you hit them fire escapes, you know where to go. You get like an abandoned building, you duck in the window and go down the stairs. Cops be looking for you all over the place, can't find you.
Get down the basement.
It was something at night. It's nice to sit out and just kid what you want to do when you grow up and stuff like that, and so forth. Because not everybody could be running out to Coney Island. So you made your park on the roof. It was all right.
We couldn't go to Jefferson Pool. We couldn't go up to High Bridge. We used to have to go to
Colonial Pool.
Wait a minute. And when we went to the Colonial Pool, all the gangs used to be up there. Yeah. You see a group here, a group there, a group there. Everybody on each other like this.
Now, I remember there was a time we couldn't take the trolley car to 125th Street and Amsterdam Avenue because Iris Dukes was up there.
That's right.
And they were 124th Street and LaSalle and Old Broadway. Yes. You tell people about that, they say, what, Old Broadway? They don't know nothing about that. Yeah, because these were the things. The Italian kids had a club over there called the Red Wings, and they were tough. They had all kinds of clubs, and these clubs would do battle if you come in their territory.
Okay, brother.
If you cross Fifth Avenue, you got a war on your hands. Everything was relegated to your territory. The women ain't supposed to go out the territory. You don't go. They even had truce time for you. On Sunday morning, that was church day. No gang busting, no nothing on a Sunday morning. You understand? Now, when you come back home and get into your play clothes and stuff and go outside, well, that's an entirely different
The war is on.
The war is on.
When you look back at the gang war, all right, a lot of fellas lost their life in there, you know? For what? For nothing. But when you look back in the years, you look back like this here. It's either you had to survive or I had to survive. You understand? And the main reason I can say this to you, because I was involved in it, but thank God I'm still here.
Activity became a hard fact of uptown life. With fathers and uncles and big brothers off to the war and not around to say no, a lot of Harlem kids took to roaming the streets in search of their own kind of combat.
I had no idea how I would find a gang leader. I really didn't. But I've always sort of taken a chance, you know. I knew a friend up there. His name was Jimmy Morrow. He was a detective up at the 135th Street precinct. So I went up to see Jimmy. And Jimmy says, look, no gang leader is going to risk his neck by being photographed by Life magazine. He's not going to expose himself to police. And I said, well, I should have known that. I said, but I got to do this story, Jimmy. He said, well, I don't know what to do. About that time, a kid walks in. He had sort of red curly hair and freckles and a tough-looking chin and a pug nose. He looked like a pug, you know. And he was about 16 years old. And he went up to the desk sergeant, and he began to give that desk sergeant hell. He used some language that I couldn't possibly use here. And I said, who is that? And Jimmy had just walked back in the room. He said, oh, that's Red Jackson. He said, now that's the guy you need. He said, he's the toughest leader in all of Harlem. I said, Red? Yeah. He said, yeah, you wouldn't do it. I said, well, I'm going to stick around. So Red was complaining about a friend of one of his boys had gotten killed the night before, thrown in the East River. So finally he came over and sat down next to me, and he says, what you in for? I said, I'm not in for anything. He said, you detective? I said, no. I said, my name's Gordon Parks. And he said, my name's Red. I said, look, Red, I got a problem. I said, I promised to do a story for a big magazine called Life. And I don't know how I'm going to do it. He says, what's Life? I said, it's a magazine. He said, never heard of it. So I said, well, I got one here. I'll show it to him. I showed it to him. He said, you know, so why should I be stupid enough to put my picture in that magazine? So I said, well, Jimmy Morrow told me that you wanted to break up your gang and that the police were trying to help you. He says, yeah, that's how my guy got killed last night. He said, because we wasn't protecting him, because we thought the police was going to break up the gang. I said, well, what I can do for you is kind of help break up the gang, and as well as get my story, and we'll both be in good shape. He said, no, I'm not going to do that. So I rode him home with him, and he liked the feel of that Buick, and he liked the feel of having a chauffeur. And what gang leader in Harlem had a chauffeur with a Buick Roadmaster, you know what I mean? So when we got home on 116th Street, he said, look, I'll talk to the guys about this. And he said, I'll talk to the war counselor. If they agree, it's okay with me. But I can't do it without them. He said, you come back tomorrow and I'll let you know. So Red came to me and said, we're going to rumble tonight. I said, oh. He said, I want you to do me a favor. I said, what's that? He said, I'd like very much to have a trench coat like yours and some dark glasses. I said, Red, I have another one at home. I'll give it to you. So that was a mark of authority, you know. And that night, I was very frightened because I'd never seen a gang rumble. And we went up on 135th Street, I remember, between 135th Street and 136th Street. That's where the other gang hung out. And they cornered those guys in one of the basements. And he said, who spit on my sister? Just like that. So the guy looked at one of the other guys. So Red walked over to him, pulled his shirt open, put the knife right over his heart, said, you know how to cut your gizzard out, just like that. Then he took the knife and just about an inch, not deep, flashed it right across his chest like that. Now, don't you ever spit on my sister again. Tough kids joined the gang to protect themselves against other gangs. And Red had a mother who was very worried all the time that one of them was going to get killed because his brother fought with another gang. But then another rumble, one of the other kids were killed. And so we were going back to see him at the mortuary there in Harlem. We saw the kid. He'd been beaten up, and Red actually lifted the kid's head up off of the mat in the coffin, checked his bruises, and decided that he was going to mete out the same thing to them when he caught them, you know. I wondered about him, you know. He could have been a great leader because he had that natural talent to be a leader. But it was just sort of wasted, you know, in a way. But I've run across kids like that from Harlem several different times who, if they'd have had a chance at something better, with an education, with some care and some spiritual nourishment, that they would have made it.
I had tried this out in Chicago for many years. And now I say Chicago is too small. I want to go where first-class things are. I want to go to Harlem. I came to Harlem, and they said, this is Harlem. I jumped out the car. Let me walk on the streets of Harlem. This is Harlem. Just couldn't believe it, just like I've gone to heaven. It was a beautiful place. Been here ever since. I had a sign on the window dancing, and people would stop in to see about lessons. And caught on so well with my system. I said, well, now I've got to get more people here so I can show Harlem what I've done that I've done in Chicago. So I'd go on the streets, 125th Street, and see girls and boys pick out very nice-looking girls, very nice-looking boys. A lot of them would, boys would come and run from school, throw rocks and things at me and say little bad things and run out. And one day I grabbed them. I said, now why are you wasting all of that energy coming here trying to molest me? I said, if you had any sense, you'd come in there and see what that woman can teach you. I said, come in there, I'll teach you how to dance and won't charge you one cent. I said, can't you get a group of together? Well, we're so sorry, lady, we did that. You teach us how to tap dance? I certainly will teach you how to tap dance. Not only teach you how to tap dance, teach you how to act, too, because I do drama and piano and dancing. Those are the things that I teach. So sure enough, a group of those little bad boys from the school came by here and started what they call their little club. And plenty of the boys didn't have no food to eat and no place to stay. We'd put in nickels and dimes, and then they'd go out and get red beans. I'd put a big tub of red beans and cook them red beans and rice and feed them, and they'd stay right here during my dance. But they could dance. But in the meantime, to exhibit this natural rhythm that they had to learn these steps. They had to learn discipline. Because they can get out there and bip, bop, the boom, the bam, and it's all right. but not showing that they've had any training. This young girl you see in the front here dancing, her father brought her to me. I think she was about 12 or 13 at that time. She's become quite a famous theatrical name, Josephine Prenice. And some of the greatest little dancers, greatest little actors, was out of that group of bad little street boys that used to come up here and say little bad things and run out. Sabbath? Yeah. Sabbath? Yeah. Sabbath? Say it around. That's up, bip out the bip. A bip bop, bip out the boom. A bip bop, bip out the boom. A bip bop, bip out bugle. Take that bugle. Yeah, 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 now. Take that bugle, stay it on down. That's that at the top. Yeah!
Harlem has nourished many giants in the performing arts. In the 1940s, bebop was pioneered in an uptown nightclub, Minton's, where Miles Davis, Lester Young, Charlie Parker, and Dizzy Gillespie, John Coltrane and Thelonious Monk, Max Roach, and Bud Powell were among those who improvised with inspiration and changed the world of music. The man who broke baseball's color line played for the Dodgers in Brooklyn, but that never mattered to Harlem. Robinson was always one of Harlem's very own. So were other great athletes like Say Hey, Willie Mae, and Sugar Ray Robinson, who just might have been the greatest fighter in all of ring history, was Harlem to the bone. All these people meant a lot to Harlem because they represented the quality of excellence. And in Harlem, excellence was clearly understood.
As so many people that you talk to now will tell you when they're out in the hinterlands, in the sticks. I mean, my sister and I, we'd hear Jimmy Lunsford on the radio and Claude Hopkins, a band or something like that, and we'd say, boy, one day we're going to get there. And I think people from all over the United States and possibly all over the world have that in mind when they're young, that one day I'll get to Harlem, one day. And, well, I came to Harlem in the 50s, and my office was a telephone booth because I was representing a syndicate of 60 black newspapers, and that was one of my requirements to get into Harlem and get a good story each and every day. Naturally, coming from Ohio, I did not know too many people. I came in and I found that everybody was hanging at the Teresa Bar at 125th Street and 7th Avenue, the Teresa Hotel Bar. And, of course, one of the people who held sway at that time was Willie Bryant, the mayor of Harlem. Of course, he was a well-known disc jockey, had played with Ethel Waters and Mamba's Daughters. And so I went up to Willie and I said to him, look, I am a newspaper man. I'm here new in town. I can see that you know everybody at the bar and everybody who comes in here. And I wonder, would you be good enough from time to time to introduce me to people who are here, well-known people who are possible news stories, news sources. So Willie Brown turned to me in his typical way. He said, damn. He said, hey, you're a new kind of dude. And I said, I said, what do you mean? He said, well, I mean, most newspaper men come up to me and say, I know everything. And he said, but you come and say, I don't know anybody. I want you to help me. He said, you know something? I'm going to help you. And from that day on, Willie Bryant became one of the greatest sources of news to me, and he helped me to build a newspaper career. At that time, they began to call that TV Lane, from 125th Street down past the front of the Teresa to 126, that short block, because everybody who was somebody in the black world eventually passed through there.
World-famous people always got up to Harlem, where the hand of fellowship was usually being offered. After all, Harlem had its own royalty, its Duke, its Count, its Lady Day. So queens and emperors and more than one pope have all felt right at home in Harlem. And when Cuba's Fidel Castro felt in 1960 that his accommodations at a downtown New York hotel just didn't suit him, he brought it uptown to the famed Teresa. And with Castro in Harlem, uptown became a third world capital.
There was a great festive attitude and a great feeling of being recognized by the people of the community, because here they were playing a part in the real international role with a very, very powerful government. This, to me, was an event that I had not seen historically in this community and may not see in this community for a long time to come.
Harlem celebrated not only for Castro, but for itself. And for those few days, uptown was bigger maybe than it had ever been before. But the bright lights dimmed eventually, and Harlem wasn't glowing in the aftermath. There were pains that refused to go away, wounds that just wouldn't heal. And enemies that made Harlem shout, "How long? How long?" Something was growing fat in the streets, in the rooms, in Harlem's air throughout the 60s.
When the people in the community saw it breaking down, the people went out and demanded police officers. They wanted people, the captains in charge of the precinct, because they saw that something had happened. No one cared any longer. So when the community went to Mayor Wagner, it started there. And after the riot and other things like that, no response. And I was a member of one of these committees. The community went back to ask about the drug situation. No response. We will assign a commission or somebody will appoint Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so to come. And most of the time, the Mr. So-and-so, Miss So-and-so didn't live near the community, much less in the community, and didn't really care. And when we asked for people like Seeley, because I was in the committee, to get Captain Seeley, who was then a flight captain, meaning that he had no precinct, just going from one precinct to the other, working under another captain. And we were told that he had to wait on the role for the civil service role. And we know that Morgan and other people like that over the years had been taken out of all kinds of civil service ranks and been appointed to jobs. So we demanded, and finally they said it couldn't happen. So we said, well, we couldn't be responsible for what's going to happen to the community. That afternoon it happened. He was appointed. But what happened? When you get the Seeley, you got the Artie Hill, you got the Johnson, and so forth, to run the precinct. 3 weeks later, or 4 weeks, a month, 6 months later, those same captains that they told us, by virtue of civil service and other things, could not take over, suddenly became inspectors. And as they became inspectors, they were moved out to the community, and again, we didn't have the people. My oldest son is a victim of drugs.
Now, I say that because people would say, in Harlem, this and that happens. I have 9 children. Only one of my children, I could say, that I've lost, more or less, and the result was drugs. Not as a boy 9 years old or 10 or 16, but as a boy, a man, 20 years of age at Columbia University. Still, the drug environment took my son. With all the books and things, he had the same exposure to the books as all the other children. Of course, others went on to become doctors and lawyers. But that one child, you see, this father couldn't mark off and still cannot mark off because it's still a son, still a living son.
Heroin, a controlled substance, just flowed out of control through Harlem, on its way through veins all over America. That terrible white horse couldn't be broken, and monkeys jumped on human backs and stayed there. Ghana's late Kwame Nkrumah speaks to a crowd in Harlem that knows its teenagers are being exposed to an evil time. There is pain. There is great need. And maybe more than anything else, Harlem is looking for leadership, for direction. A man seated behind Nkrumah waits to speak to Harlem. The man's name is Little. To the world, he is Malcolm X.
Attention, Americans without prescription drug coverage.
In the 60s, the blood of America is spilled. The gains in these years can be measured quickly. The losses will always be painful. This rally in Harlem is part of an enormous effort some Americans make to redeem the national promise.
I have never in all my life been so proud of Harlem as I am tonight. When Core and Snick first got together 2 days ago and talked about having a mass march and rally in Harlem, people said, oh, don't do it, because if you get that many black and white people marching in Harlem, you'll have a fight. There'll be a race riot. I told them nonsense. This is the real Harlem. This is the spirit of Harlem.
In Harlem, the mobs are broken up by sticks, with billy clubs, with bullets, with extreme brutality. In a white area, the mobs are broken up in a very gentle manner. In fact, they aren't broken up at all.
Harlem is not only suspicious of police. There's no real suspicion. Let me give you a picture. A boy grows up in Harlem. He sees the police take money from whores on the streets. He sees the police take money from the number writers. He sees the police beat people who have done nothing. He sees the police lie when Negroes come to court. It is not that he is suspicious of them. It is that he loathes them, that he has no respect for them. And that is to say that he has no respect for what we call law and order. He cannot objectively have it.
Brothers and sisters, we want to welcome you to our rally, our unity rally, for a united black front. To unite all factions of our people. To unite every one of the 20 million so-called Negroes into one group. And you'll notice, whenever the white man thinks that we're going to call a rally to knock our own kind, you see him jammed out here. He wants to hear us say something against King or against Bunch or against Farmer, against someone of our own kind. As long as you and I are going to attack each other or talk about each other or heap scorn and ridicule upon each other, the white man gets his kick. But when he knows that we're going to come together in unity and harmony, he won't get his kick, he will get kicked.
My personal political philosophy is black nationalism, which means that the black man should control the politics of his own community and control the politicians who are in his own community. My personal economic philosophy is also black nationalism, which means that the black man should have a hand in controlling the economy of the so-called Negro community. He should be developing the type of knowledge that will enable him to own and operate the businesses and thereby be able to create employment for his own people, for his own kind. And the social philosophy also is black nationalism, which means that instead of the black man trying to force himself into the society of the white man, we should be trying to eliminate from our own society the ills and the defects and make ourselves likable and sociable among our own kind.
Do you consider yourself militant?
I consider myself Malcolm.
And I saw his influence very vividly on the night that one of his members, Mr. Hinton, was beaten up by the police on Lenox Avenue, and they beat him up over there over the disturbance that happened, and they took him into the 28th precinct. And this happened around about, I think 10, 11 o'clock, and I was home in bed at 2, and one of the police officers, a high-ranking police officer, called my house in Queens, and asked me if I would come back to my office in Harlem. And I wanted to know what, and he told me that a situation had arisen, and at that situation, which was documented by, I think, the Saturday Evening Post, the stories in there, upwards of 4,000 black Muslims had surrounded the 28th precinct. And they were surrounding this precinct in a manner that was as peaceful as anything you could see, but it was as ominous as anything you could ever think of, because the sisters were all there in their white robes, and they were standing in the gutter of the street, both sides, in front of the precinct, all the way down from 7th Avenue to 8th Avenue and 123rd Street. And the Muslim men, they were standing on the sidewalks, 5 deep behind them. And nobody was saying a word, and it was a frightening scene, I tell you the truth. It's not a mob scene. I refuse to call it a mob scene, but these 4,000 people standing there just staring in the darkness staring through the darkness at the 28th precinct. So they wanted to know, and they had been trying to get Malcolm X to move these people. And so they asked me if I would use our relationship to see what Malcolm would do. Would he do it? So Malcolm came in, and we sat down, the 4 of us. And I'll never forget Walter Arm, who was white. He made the big mistake. He said, now, I would like to tell you something, Miss X. We wanted to sit down and talk with you and get your views on this situation. He said, but I want to tell you that my presence here as a deputy commissioner and another deputy commissioner indicates that we are not begging you. We are telling you we want those people moved. And at that moment, Malcolm X, in his Well, he had this, it was a cool mannerism. He simply got up from the chair that he was sitting in and started to walk out without saying a word. And I can hear his heels going down the city room of the Amsterdam News, which is maybe well, it's a good 60 feet all the way down, and it bang, bang, bang. Malcolm X walking out. And Walter Arm looks at me and says, "Where's he going?" He didn't say a word, so Malcolm hadn't said a word. And I said, "He's obviously leaving." And Bob Mangum says, "Well, you told him that you could work the situation out, so I guess he's letting you work it out, see?" So he said, "Can you stop him? Can you stop him, Mr. Hicks?" And I said, "I'll try." So I left my desk and walked halfway, and I said, "Mr. Hicks, can I speak to you a minute?" He turned around and said, "Brother Hicks?" "Yeah." So I said, "Look, I mean, can you see your way clear not to leave now?" I said, "Obviously, the man is concerned now." So he said, "If you ask me to come back, I'll come back." And I said, "Would you please come back?" So he came back in and he sat down. And then by that time, Walter Arm had agreed to let Bob Mangum, who was black, speak, you see. So Bob then went on and diplomatically said to Malcolm that, "Look, we would like to know under what terms you would consider moving your people." Well, the upshot of it was Malcolm told him that one of our brothers has been beaten up by the police. He is now in the 28th precinct in jail. We don't know how badly he was beaten, but we want to see him ourselves and determine whether he needs medical treatment, and if he needs medical treatment, to see that he is taken to a hospital. And so Walter Arm says, "Is that all?" He said, "That's all." So Bob Mangum said, "I think that's fair enough," and I said, "So do I." So we walked from there over to the 28th precinct, and through this, both sides of the street lined up. I mean, these people were just not moving a hair. And it was obvious the man laying in the cell there with his head smashed in that he needed hospitalization. That's the first thing Malcolm said. This man should be in the hospital. And Inspector McGowan looked at him, and apparently that was the first time he'd seen him. He said, "I agree with you." And he said, "Well, let's get him in the hospital." So then Malcolm came to the door of the 28th precinct. And he stood there at the door, McGowan standing beside him, and I was standing beside McGowan. And as I previously said, I mean, there were 4,000 or 5,000 Muslims in the streets by this time. And the precinct's in the middle of the block. And he simply stood there, raised his arms, and gave a signal like that. And it was eerie. It was eerie because these people just faded into the night. It was the most orderly movement of 4,000 or 5,000 people I've ever seen in my life. They just simply disappeared. And right before our eyes, I mean, they got out of that block. And McGowan, Inspector McGowan, who was standing there, he looked at me and he said, "Mr. Hicks, do you see what I see?" And I said, "Yes." And I think this was possibly a slip on his part because I interpreted as, he said to me, he said, "That's too much power for one man to have."
So instead of legislation, in my opinion, it takes education. The whites have to be re-educated so that the racism that they have in their heart can be eliminated, and our people have to be re-educated so that we will know how to do something for ourselves instead of waiting for others to do it for us all the time.
In visiting New York City during this period, I want to make it very clear that I wholeheartedly endorse the demands of the Unity Committee already delivered to Mayor Wagner, and I made this clear to Mayor Wagner in my conversations with him. I endorse this committee as representative of the Harlem community, and of course I urge Mayor Wagner to deal with the Unity Committee as being representatives of the community.
Congressman Fowler, what must Mayor Wagner do between now and Election Day to get your support?
Well, first thing he's got to do is appoint a Negro Deputy Police Commissioner, which we've always had. Second, a Civilian Review Board, so that they can't try themselves only. Third, to start firing these housing inspectors in Harlem who let violations accumulate and for a $5 or $10 bill or don't do anything about them. My church was given 2 apartment houses the other day on 137th Street, free. I said, how wonderful. And the lawyer checked into it and found out there were 100 violations on the 2. It would cost more to have removed the violations than to have bought the property.
At this point, sir, do you plan to actively campaign against Mayor Wagner?
Oh, I wouldn't say that at this point.
A new broadened base of leadership comes to Adam Powell's home turf. Activist Dick Gregory, student leaders Rap Brown, and Stokely Carmichael join men like James Farmer and Roy Ennis of CORE in challenging the world to see Harlem and Black America in the light of a new day. But words and demonstrations cannot stem all tides. This Harlem mother, Mrs. Annie Powell, has just learned that her son James, age 15, has been shot and killed by a New York City police officer. It is the summer of 1964. Police, virtually all of them white, march into Harlem like an army of occupation entering a foreign land. Now the jail's filled with young men who themselves are filled with rage. Police stand watch over Harlem, and angry words rush into Harlem's future.
About the Southland, I can look back and see men and women leaving from New York City, going to Mississippi. But today, you don't need to go to Mississippi. You need to take a ride through Harlem and look at the situation. You can't hold back the truth, boy. You can't hold back the truth. The situation down south have absolutely turned itself around. Now, New York City has become Mississippi. New York City has become Alabama. New York City has become Kentucky. New York City has become Memphis, Tennessee. New York City has become the state of North Carolina. Because, let me tell you, racism and classism is on the rampage in America. No wonder you are getting high off of these various chemicals. Because for the first time, you become satisfied. But let me tell you one thing. They have placed the rope with the dope. Did you know that? They have placed the rope with the dope. And if you don't think genocide is going on in America, especially up on the oppressed black poor, you'll get the shock of your life. You don't know what history is all about. The ruling classes in America is calling for your head. We need you to put your bodies on the line and stop stiffing and jiving, destroying your body, destroying your health, destroying your mind, because this is how the man can come in and pick us off one at a time. Nobody is being put on trial for hurting us. Nobody's being put on trial for killing us. But you know, that ain't nothing new. They did the same thing to Jesus. They did the same thing to Jesus. Yes, they did. Yes, they did. And I'm going to tell you, it ain't going to change. It ain't going to change. It ain't going to change.
You can't speak to a child or an adult who is on drugs. There's no reasoning there. There's no logic. There's no feeling for the family. No feeling for self. And when that broke down, the great feeling for self, even the 1960s, that brought about the awareness of self, the songs, I'm Black and Proud, the buttons, and all of this, it was an attempt to regain what the drug had already started to break down. And since Those of us who are not law enforcement people, who had no control of what is going to happen with the drug, who had been screaming, who had gone to the mayor after mayors, trying to get a relief from this situation, found our children. The children who had been going to school, now these same children, the younger ones, no longer want to go to school, to be on the subway, to become now involved in crime. When we had the street gangs, the Harlem of the street gang was war between teenagers, but not a depth of hatred of self. It was war between territories. But with drugs, it became a war of hatred of self, the destruction of self. That which didn't work, you can take some drugs, and that will finish it. And from that point on, no longer, what I had told you originally, no longer were we able to go on the roof in the summer and spread the blanket and sleep and have a picnic, to go to Central Park with the bicycle, with the family.
One of the difficulties with crime in this city is that the police watch us in Harlem, but they guard the property of the people downtown. That's one of the reasons, I suppose, that when we have riots, during which we want to show our exasperation, our frustration, and all the rest against white society, we do it in Harlem on the theory that whites own most of the property here. Instead of doing it downtown, where there would be greater damage, greater impact, and greater notice taken, the assumption is, I believe, that since the cops guard that property so carefully, you wouldn't get an opportunity to do very much about it. When we destroy Harlem, we're trying to say, in effect, look, you white people downtown, you want to ignore it, you own it, you want to destroy it in your way, we'll do it in our way, in the hopes that perhaps it will be built up into something better. But that's a fallible argument also, because most of the civil rights struggles which have resulted in any progress have resulted in progress for the middle class, people who get a few token jobs, and that's about it.
There can be, and this is one man's opinion, there can be no real social development until there is real economic development. I mean, it's the key. I'm the president of the Commonwealth Holding, which is a subsidiary of the Harlem Commonwealth Council. And as the chief executive officer, I'm over all of the corporations, the subsidiary corporations, which is 14, that the council owns. We've been able to prove that we can own and operate businesses that not only provide services for the community, but on a national basis. You know, our steel is sold all over the world. Our foundry provides services for other cities and states. And it's just an indication of what can be done. We're just kind of a token thing, showing an example of what can be done with the right resources pooled the right way. You know, I think that we as black people can solve a lot of our own social problems if they understand that if they just deal with us on economic basis, you understand, give us the same shot as anybody else have economic, we can do the same things, you know. If we have our own Ford Foundations and we have our own General Motors kind of corporation, they can be the financiers of the community. And I think that's coming about now.
It has been coming about for some Harlem business people, especially those being helped by government financing. But attorney Cora Walker is a Harlemite who knows that some corporate dreams wake up disappointed.
The idea dawned upon me, and really starting in the question of the riots, because the riots hit here at 64, that in talking to the people on the street, they felt they didn't have anything. They didn't own anything. Everybody owned something. So I then took the co-op concept and went out with them, started out in November of 66, that if they wanted to, they could own something on a cooperative basis. So then we took a sound truck, started out 145th Street and 8th Avenue, and said, if you're interested in finding out how you can buy shares in a supermarket that you own, and we were flooded with people. The store opened June 4th of 68. They voted to name the store Harlem Co-op Supermarket. People used to ride by just to see the store. But the beautiful part was the stockholders. They really loved that store. So if they came in there and they didn't have salt, they didn't buy salt until we got salt. The first 9 months, we made $2,800,000. And it was a threat. It was an absolute threat to our competitors. 9 months after we were there, it arrived. Somebody made a decision that we had to be stopped, and they threw around the so-called picket line. And the picket line really was not a valid picket line because it was not our workers who were the backbones of it. Because the co-op really cut into the business of our competitors. That was in the back of it. But the little people of Harlem kept that store open. They worked in there. They had to go out because nobody would deliver anything. You couldn't get a loaf of bread. And they then we had people who would get in their cars, and first they started going to the warehouses and picking it up. Then they got word of that, and because of threats of retaliation, they wouldn't sell it to us. So then we developed, it would be a Young Mothers Program, any name, but we'd meet the bread trucks and buy bread from the bread trucks, and then they bring it in on in their cars, and then they sell it to themselves. But we had 16 picture windows, and those 16 picture windows were broken 15 times. The police were never able to find anybody at any time. Both of my sons at that time were in college. And, of course, when they came home in the summer of '69, they were right there at the store helping out whichever way they could. And they came to me and said that they had been told that if they did not convince me to walk away from the supermarket, that they were going to be without a mother. So at that point, the Panthers were dying and itching to retaliate with violence. And some, black groups, nationalist groups wanted. And my concept was use, the system of justice to establish, and you're going to get a court order. You never got a court order. I'm sorry they didn't, They're sorry I didn't let them do their own thing. But the store closed in March of '76 because through all of this, they just were inundated with debt and financial failure not because they couldn't run a store, not because they could not run a supermarket, but because they were not able to deal with the inner workings of the food industry. I was heartbroken because there was the faith of so many little people that justice will prevail.
The churches of Harlem are still ports in many storms. Houses of worship where the spirit can be repaired and the right hand of fellowship is taken seriously. And through the leadership of ministers like M. Moran Weston, Harlem's churches bear witness in other ways.
We started in 1959 trying to see whether a plan could be developed and financed so that the housing here, which was going downgrade, could be upgraded. It was not until 1977 that we were able to complete a package that would have the support of government through government insurance. And, of course, the participation of the banking institutions is easy because the mortgage is guaranteed, so they have no risk. These buildings were worn out, not fit for people to live in. What we've tried to do is take those buildings because fundamentally the structure was good, but the inside was not. So we've completely redesigned them to create 3, 2, and 1-bedroom apartments for people to live in, changed a 6-story walk-up building to an elevator apartment house, revitalizing the total place from the Schomburg Library to the old YMCA. The next stage, of course, is people who live in them must see these as part of their cultural, spiritual, as well as their physical heritage.
Redevelopment has become the magical phrase uptown. From fabled nightclubs to grand old theaters breathing with new life, Harlem still tells the world that nothing beats a try but a failure.
Gentlemen that bought the Apollo are from the neighborhood, and everything is all brand new, refurbished, carpet from ear to ear. We got it all right here, the all brand new Apollo Theater. So, in case you don't have tickets for tonight, don't worry about it. The Apollo is a landmark in Harlem. It's been here for 45 years, and I hope by God it'll be here for 245 more. And this same red carpet that you see here tonight will be laying right here each and every time you knock on these doors. So from now on, each and every week, someone in the record world that you love and want to see will be right here. Everybody in the business you can think of will be coming here throughout the years to come. People like Mr. Ralph McDonald and friends. In the coming week, people like Mr. Marvin Gaye, Mr. Gladys Knight, along with Mr. James Brown, Al Green, old James, Patti LaBelle, Patrick Cole, the world famous people.
Well, as a kid, I used to come here. I hate to say now playing hooky and coming here because I don't want these youngsters who are going to be politicians think that that is the way to do it. But we used to see some of the biggest names in the world, you know, right here. And you felt so close to it because there was no question in my mind that Billie Holiday was singing to me. And it was only when I got older that I found out there were other people in the audience.
I think it's good for the community. It brings back money back into the community, and it creates jobs for all of us.
So what I'm saying in essence is this. Whatever you venture to do, don't spend that money downtown at the Phillips Forum. Spend it here. This is a black-only establishment now, and we would appreciate it very much if you would treat the theater the same way you treat your house. Because this is your home away from home. Can I get a amen on that from everybody? Amen. Right on. Amen. Right on.
You know, if you look at any redevelopment area, I don't think it happened. It's very well planned. A neighborhood is particularly taken down to the bottom in order for it to be redeveloped. And it's very hard to take a neighborhood. I mean, I would have a fat problem with somebody coming in and telling me they're going to redevelop Mount Vernon. That's situated with people and stores and whatnot. So I think that things like the South Bronx and Harlem hasn't happened by chance. I think it's all part of a plan, and for the first time we've been in on the plan. I see on the drawing board complete new 125th Street. Our shopping mall with the underground tunnels meeting into the subways, it's no longer a pipe dream. It's just a matter of coordinating through the Chamber of Commerce and the various businessmen what portion of it do they pick up, what portion do we pick up through the federal funds coming in. It's not a black move. It's a move that's being put together by a lot of people, blacks and whites all over. And I think the revitalization of the whole Harlem concept will emerge as a testimony to the struggles that black folks went through. And that's one of the fears that I've had in the last year, that we was somehow losing that. You know, it wasn't relevant anymore. And I think people have to understand that this redevelopment came from that. Had that not been there, there wouldn't have been a Harlem Commonwealth Council, there wouldn't have been a HARU, there wouldn't have been any of these things.
It seemed like some of the city fathers and some of the state fathers and some of the federal fathers have forgotten that Harlem was one time one of the major attractions for tourists coming in. Now, what we want to do is figure out another way to attract tourism back into the community. This project that you have in front of us is what right now is the International Trade Center. That is our general concept of it. This is the state office building in which we're now located. The International Trade Center, which is concentrating on mainly third world nations, with a parking facility at the bottom, which has already started, a convention center of about 3,000 seats, and arts and craft shops with African, Caribbean, Latin American goods being sold, with a hotel of about 500 rooms. If this were to come about, clearly there's a whole lot of benefits other than the attraction of people. I mean, nobody's going to allow an ambassador to get hurt walking up down the streets of Harlem, and your cops will be around, and the streets will be clean, and I think everybody will do whatever they can to protect the dignitaries that will come up to the street. Now, located on the eastern portion of the state office building site, there's a organizational business called the Tree of Life, headed by Mr. Kanya. It's our favorite building.
This is on the most populous corner of Harlem. That's exactly why we have to be here. And we got a dynamite thing. That's a strange-looking vibration out there, right?
Yes.
And the music comes out of there, it's strange, and so it like attracts you in there. So we have a lot of people in here just because, you know, they driving by and, hey, that looks different. Funny-looking signs up here. The home of unusual books with the knowledge you know but don't know that you know. Oh, it's heavy. And people come in. And once they come in, they're in. Black and white, rich and poor, young and old, straight and gay, all kind of people. Because this is a people's universe now. Everybody has the capacity to open up and become a giant, you see, a spiritual giant. This little brother right here, I can guarantee you, if I could take him and instruct him about some things, he would never again look back. Because I would wake him up to some knowledge that he already has inside of him. He's not new. How old are you, my man? 5 years old. You see? And when we begin to understand that might be Malcolm X standing there right there. You don't know. Stephanie, Malcolm X ain't gone nowhere. His work hadn't been finished. So the minute you take the body, the spirit jumps back and gets another one. That's right. That's right. What it is, I'm serious, is waking up the knowledge that's in him and let him find out what he was born in this life to do. We all have a special job to do.
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Definitely. So the only way to heal Harlem is to heal the people of Harlem. Not by putting up new buildings. That state office building doesn't make people love themselves any better. Do you love that state office building there, brother? Does it do anything for you? No, man. So the power of the people will save this building, which we will save Harlem, which we will save New York, which we will save America. But first, save yourself. In other words, clean out the Holy Temple.
And, of course, there's been a great deal of community concern, just generally, about any building being torn down where you have a viable business, and that is a viable business, where nobody believes anything is going to ever be brought back into that facility because of the history of the problems that we have in redevelopment. The problem that we have is this: the eastern portion of the state office building site is probably the most magnificent site we have in Harlem in terms of transportation, in terms of location, in terms of size. We've talked to a lot of developers, and what they have clearly proposed is that whatever is done, they must have that eastern corner, south of the eastern corner, I guess it is, because it's right over the RRT subway line, and which is one of the major ways of getting in and out of Harlem. But we are prepared to do whatever we possibly can to help out the Tree of Life. In fact, what we're proposed is to bring them into the new facility. Of course,
The facts are that that's a state-owned building. The occupants do not have a lease. In the olden days, they call it squatting.
All of our leaders have been in this building. Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, all of them. Elijah, everybody's been in here. The vibrations of all of our leaders, past, present, and future, are in that building. Why tear that down?
The truth of the matter is far worse than anybody wants to face up to or make it out to be. See, Harlem has a glorious tradition. Harlem made a great contribution to America, to the culture of America. But what I want to say now is that Harlem now is slowly, systematically, piece by piece being dismantled. The city around you is dying. You see all of these abandoned buildings, abandoned streets. Yes, sir. You can walk down streets, man, where you used to see children running and playing. You can walk down streets, man, where there's nothing but bombed out buildings. But where's the bomb, man?
Old Harlem stays. It waits and watches. These are places Harlemites have known, it seems, forever. But people uptown learn early that nothing lasts that long. Harlem grows, and Harlem goes. Shortly after its grand reopening, the Apollo Theater closes down again. The crowds now go to other places, and this Harlem dream falls apart. In Harlem, there are parades offering tribute to the past, to the ancestors, to the days that will not come again. For the future, well, Harlem has its storytellers. The speakers remain, and the story continues.
Harlem is still the place. It's still the Mecca so far as I'm concerned. And the awareness of blacks, that is that, hey, we got to get a piece of the action. This is the one thing that I think makes the future bright. And there is also the fact that the white world realizes. I mean, we've heard about white flight. They run Long Island, they run here, they run there, and pretty soon they find there's no place to go, so they start back. Well, they start back and they say, well, what about these brownstones?
When I go back there now and I look at it, thinking perhaps that it would have been some changes for the better, but the places where I hung out, the old house that I first lived in is still there, crumbling. I walked into it once, and the bedroom is still there, and the rat holes are still there. And instead of it being better, actually it's worse. And for a lot of people, young people especially, it must be much worse than it was when I was there. At least I had some hope. Now I don't see hope for some of those kids there at all.
And the few people that's got little jobs and whatnot, they're going to have to come back and help us lift ourselves up a little further, because the weak link is the strongest link in that chain. And we need Stokely Carmichael, Martin Luther King, James Foreman, Sufi, Joe Kelly, Malcolm X.
I used to feel that it wasn't going to happen in my day. But I think that in my day, before I close my eyes, Harlem's going to really be a shining place.
People say, is Harlem going or coming? Harlem is Harlem. It was here before I got here, and it was here before you got here, and it's going to be here when you're gone.